Hi, welcome to episode 2 of my Edgar Allan Poe podcast series. In this podcast, or in this episode, we're going to be talking about the context around The Raven, which was Edgar Allan Poe's most famous poem. However, right before we get into that, let me clear up something that I mentioned in the last podcast. So, about Poe's death. I talked about how he was found on the streets of Baltimore, but I didn't explicitly say when he died or even if he died, but I kind of implied it. So now let me say he was found on the streets of Baltimore on October 3rd, 1849, delirious and high. They rushed him to the hospital, and 4 days later, on October 7th, in the hospital, 1849, he died. Edgar Allan Poe passed away. Okay, now that that's cleared up, let's move on. Release date. The Raven was first attributed to Poe in the print of the New York Evening Mirror on January 29th, 1845. Virginia's illness. So, Poe's wife, Virginia, was fighting tuberculosis for 5 years. In this moment in his life, and obviously her life as well, was extremely important and is the main inspiration for his poem, The Raven. And so, more about her illness. She fought it for 5 years, like I mentioned, and she had flushed cheeks, night sweats, shortness of breath, chest pains, coughing, spitting up blood. And this kind of goes back to the relatability factor with Poe. Like, I think all of us have or do not want to witness someone that we love suffering. And, and I think a lot of us have witnessed that as well. So that kind of allows us to relate to Poe and to relate to the idea in The Raven, which is based off, this experience. And that's definitely important to note. Next, his mother, his brother, and his foster mother all died from tuberculosis. So Poe knew how this was going to end, which made it even more detrimental because it was kind of a foregone conclusion. And for Poe, I think specifically, his wife's love and having that relationship with his wife was so significant because if you take into account the way he was brought up, where he really didn't receive love from anyone, his parents died. Obviously, he had a stepfather who really didn't like him too much, and his stepmother, she did like him, but obviously died before the stepfather did, a lot earlier. So he really didn't receive that love. So finding that in his wife Virginia, and developing that relationship was super important, and that's why this period in both their lives was just so devastating for the both of them, and especially for Poe. Okay, so now let's get to some of the quotes that Poe wrote in his letter to his friend about this time in his life where, he's taking care of his wife and he's seeing her kind of die before his eyes. So he said, "It was a horrible, never-ending oscillation between hope and despair, which he could not longer have endured with the loss of reason." And that, in those couple words, with the total loss of reason, are going to be a theme in The Raven, and just shows how closely related this event was with his poem, The Raven. Next quote. He said he became nervous in a very unusual degree. He became insane. Insane. I mean, that's such a strong word, right? And then in the last two, he talks about how he drank to try to subdue his feelings, and he felt the agonies of her death, meaning that every time she would get better, then he would find some hope and feel better. But then when she would feel worse, he would feel worse as well. And it was, again, just a never, like a very long cycle of those kind of roller coaster of emotions until she finally passed away. Okay. Other inspirations to give context to what the Raven was about, and what possibly could have he gotten these ideas from and based it off of. The talking raven. So Poe was inspired by Brick, who was the talking raven in Charles Dickens' novel Barnaby Rudge, and he actually reviewed Barnaby Rudge for Graham's magazine, because obviously he was a writer, a poet, but he also did reviews, right? And so that helped serve as inspiration. And a common theme in the two of them, or a common thread, is they both have ravens knocking on the doors, and also there were some specific lines in the two of them that also kind of matched up. Poetic meter. So what's interesting about the Raven is that it has a rhyme scheme that is A, B, C, B, B, B. And this rhyme scheme creates kind of a creepy and mysterious sound to the poem, which definitely aligns with the themes of that poem as well. So he credits this rhythm to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and he credits it to her poem Ladies Geraldine's Courtship. And he does this when he specifically states this and credits it to her when he dedicated his book The Raven and other poems to her. So we know this for sure. And now, when we talk about context, an important thing that I remember you mentioned, Professor Ontiveros, is thinking about the intended audience, right? And there's lots of intended audiences or lots of theories on what Poe's intended audience could have been for the Raven. One theory is that the Raven was simply a form of self-expression. Again, he's going through this tumultuous time and devastating time in his and his wife's life. And so he funneled those feelings into, a creation, into, the creation of this poem, right? That's one. Another theory is he wrote it for the readers of the New York Evening Mirror. Simply he has a job to go do. He works for this, print newspaper, print magazine, and he needed to go write a piece, right? And then number three is he could have been directing it specifically at people that were grieving and couldn't move on, or that were in the last couple years, days, or even hours of their loved one's death, right? And one important piece of evidence that would support this theory is that back then the life expectancy was so low. It was only around like 40 years old, and even with that, a lot of children or a lot of teenagers before they even reached adulthood died. So death was a common theme, and grieving was a common theme back then. And so writing to those people could have definitely been one of his intended audiences. So those are three theories. It could be a combination of the three, it could be one of the three, but those are definitely possibilities for his intended audience. Now, the plot summary. The characters. The man, Lenore, and the Raven. It's as simple as this. The man is mourning the loss of the girl he loved, named Lenore. Sound familiar, right? He hears knocking on the door, and the Raven comes in. And after asking the Raven a series of questions and getting the same answer, which was nevermore, he succumbs to his despair and sadness. Yep, I know. Very happy ending, right? So that's the plot summary. It's obviously mainly based off of his experience with, you know, those kind of dwindling years with his wife and her fight against tuberculosis, and that shows in the plot summary. These are my sources, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.